stage did you realise that your mother had a secret life?
I think it was when it all came out, the 30-year rule in the 1970s,
Yeah.
and you went to the first reunion.
Yes. How did that conversation go when you found out that you could say something and you thought, I think I'll mention it to the family over breakfast or something? How did that go?
Well, it was reading it in the paper. There was a little strip in the paper, just a little article, that what we'd done during the war. But people didn't realise the enormity of what we'd done. I mean, nobody, see, the Germans had never suspected it. It was a shock to them 30 years later to find that we'd been reading their messages. And you see, people like General Montgomery, when he was fighting in North Africa, he knew that Rommel wasn't very well, and he knew how many tanks he'd got, how many troops he'd got. But nobody else knew that he was the only one who knew. And so, you know, that was the solidarity of the secrecy. But no, it was just in the paper, this little report that we had been broken the Enigma code, but nobody realised the enormity of it. So I suppose I would just say, oh look, this is what I did during the war. This is the Enigma machine. The Germans had been using it since right through the 30s for coding, and it was so complicated that they were quite sure that nobody could break the code. The operator presses the letter like a typewriter, and a different letter is shown up in with bulbs, light bulbs there. The first disc goes round one click, and the next time you press A, a different letter or a different letter comes up. And the principle is that these discs go round. There are 26 points on each one, and when the first disc has clicked one, gone round 26 times, the next one starts. And when that's done 26 times, the third one starts. You also have the wiring on the front, which the operator will have set up. Well, the permutations of the setting here runs into billions. And the setting for the discs and the wiring was changed every 24 hours at midnight. So if you were going to break this code, you'd got to break it within 24 hours. Well, with all the permutations running into billions, it obviously couldn't be done without machines. And the Germans, being mathematicians and engineers, they had nobody who could break the code, so they were convinced that it was completely safe. And throughout the whole of the war, they used the Enigma machine. Well, it just so happened that we had Alan Turing, and he, with the help of Gordon Welchman and others, devised this machine, which is called a bomb. We were going to be the operators of these machines. Now, most of us were aged about 18, most of us fairly soon out of school. So here these young women, going to be operating these machines, these bomb machines. And this was going to be our job, obviously, until the end of the European war.
Did you have no idea, or was this a secret that you kept within the family, or it was just your past was another country?
It was completely secret. We never said anything to anybody.
Not even to Janet?
No, Dr. Tony, no, to nobody. If you're keeping a secret, you mustn't. If you tell somebody, you put the onus on them. And of course, during the war, you couldn't run the risk of that. So it was a complete clampdown. And of course, 30 years later, you can't remember because you haven't spoken about it, you haven't written anything down. And of course, nobody in the family knew anything about it at all. I mean, sadly, my father died, and he must have wondered what on earth I'd done during the war. Obviously nothing important, because I hadn't had any promotions. I was still a humble wren when I was demobbed. So he must have thought I'd just done. Might have been secret, it might have been important, but it wouldn't have had any responsibility, because otherwise I'd have been promoted. But no, secret's a secret, and you don't tell anybody, you don't put the onus on them to keep it secret. There was an American Army air base nearby, and they would go out on bombing raids, and in the early evening these bombers would go off in formation. Now if you could imagine, the Red Arrows were very heavy bombers with very heavy bombs in their bomb bays underneath, coming over. Well, you hear the sound of the Red Arrows, multiply that with perhaps 50 or 100 airliners full, and they would go out in formation. They'd be coming back in the early morning, perhaps, you know, about as we were going for breakfast, things like that, and they had gaps in the formation, which meant either that it was limping home or they'd been shot down. Also, that that air crew may have been killed, and they were our contemporaries. I mean, some of us had friends in the RAF, pilots. Well, you know, we knew that what we were doing was going to be helping people like that. So we were perfectly happy just to do the work and to keep it quiet. And we knew that secrecy was absolutely essential. The only people who could be trusted with this was the most senior officers, generals, air marshals, admirals, people like that. They couldn't let anybody else know that we were reading the Enigma things. And 2,000 teenage girls? Quite something. And the senior officers and 2,000 teenage girls all kept it quiet for over 30 years. Now, can you imagine that? That shows you what a difference war footing makes.
We did go to Bletchley a few years ago, didn't we? It was before they'd had an injection of lottery money to improve facilities. So I think for you it was a little disappointing that it did look a bit dilapidated at that point.
Yes.
For me it was really exciting seeing sort of where it had all happened, and the famous huts and the machine and the reality of it. I think I got more out of that than you did.
We were perfectly happy just to do the work and to keep it quiet, and we knew that secrecy was absolutely essential. But it was so nice to be doing something positive, because I mean, lots of people were doing useful war work, but ours was so hands-on, practical. We had to put these drums onto the machine like this, and we had to do some of this wiring, and then we set the machines off, and it took about half an hour for these all went round, clicking round, and they were all at a different setting, just one point on, and then those went round, and then those went round. And as I say, it took about half an hour for the whole circuit to go round. And then when it had finished, we'd take all these off and put them on a table. These were all different colours. And set up, we had a spare 108 on a stand. We would put those on, redo the wiring, set the machine going, and while those were going round, we had to check the back. Now, behind all these drums, there were these clusters of 26 thin wires, and they had to be absolutely straight, very fine wires, as you can see. If one of them had a little kink in it, it would cause the machine to stop, and we'd have a reading here. But that was a complete waste of time, because obviously it would be a false stop. So we had to check 108 of these, and all these little wires, 26 sets of them all the way around, put them on the stand ready, and when half an hour was up, take those off, put them on the table, put the new ones on. We had no daylight, we had just windows, high windows, so we worked under artificial strip lighting, which was pretty bad for our eyes. We all suffered from pink eye in the end. But they were noisy, they were smelly, and they were hot. The Colossus computer that they built was not the machine I worked on. I worked on one of the bombs, but it was the start of computing, because Alan Turing realised that a machine could work things out, not really think, but it could process things. And what would he, if he hadn't died when he did, what would he have thought of what would he have invented since what we lost with that. I mean, this incredible brain.
After the Germans surrendered, you went back because of the Japanese codes.
But only a handful of us. I don't know how I was chosen, but just because, as I say, there were 2,000 Wrens working on the box, and they all had to be given other jobs before they were demobbed. And I just went with a handful to Bletchley Park and lived at Woburn Abbey and worked on the Japanese codes. Because, of course, after VJ Day, I did this driving course at the British School of Motoring, and then I became a lorry driver. And I had bell-bottoms, and we had yellow gauntlet leather gloves, wonderful gloves which we were given.
You know, you've acquired quite a degree of fame locally and in the family, and we're all very proud of, you know, Ma's part in winning the war. So it's
well, yes, and you know, people, yes, you get a little bit of kudos for it.
Yeah,
definitely. But we were quite happy to do it. It was, we knew how important it was, and we knew how that the effect of what we were doing.